some in Washington, D.C., some Republican lawmakers like the fact that there is skepticism. They don't like the memorandum. They think it's a bad deal for America. And they're almost betting, as I think some Israelis are, on it not working and these negotiations not leading to something, and hoping Trump will then have to go back to more drastic measures.
The US and Iran will meet again in Qatar today as part of the endless stop-start peace negotiations. President Trump claims that it's been requested by the Iranians. The Iranians, of course, say they don't really have any further peace talks planned. The war is dragging on into its fifth month. It's a kind of stop-start. Prospects for peace, well, they're as muddy as ever. Let's go to Washington, to Katy Balls, Washington editor of the Times and the Sunday Times. Katy, is anybody taking these peace talks seriously?
Semi-seriously. I think the fact that you have envoys traveling, the fact that you have Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner there, means that the Americans at least hope something is happening. We also shouldn't take everything the Iranians say, as definitely being the truth. But it does fit into a familiar pattern throughout this conflict, which is the US president being quite optimistic and getting quite excited and announcing things on his Truth Social account, only for the reality to not quite pair up with that.
Do we know yet? Is the Strait of Hormuz open yet? Open in a way it was before the war, or is it open but still effectively under Iranian control? Do we have any intelligence on that?
I think the data we have is suggesting that ships are moving more than they had previously, but there's obviously been a few stumbling blocks in recent days. And then the fact that you have more strikes ongoing adds to the uncertainty. And what isn't clear, to your point, is the sense that the Iranians are still talking about how they're going to be talking to Oman about how they're going to manage it. And yet you have figures like Marco Rubio in the Trump administration saying there will be no toll. Notably, the memorandum, so the document that Trump has signed, JD Vance has signed, the Iranians has signed, did not specifically say that it would return to pre-Iran war toll-free.
Now, that jumped out at me as well when I first saw even the American version of the Memorandum of Understanding. It kind of fudged on what basis the Strait would be reopened. When I look, Katy, at these arguments over the Strait of Hormuz, over this opening up the funds that have been frozen that Iran wants to get its hands on now, and all the arguments and the end and stop and start and change, all this, I have to remind myself that there's only meant to be a 60-day window in which peace and light is meant to break out. I would suggest, with the best will in the world, none of this is going to happen in 60 days.
No, and also the memorandum was in some ways meant to be the easy bit, which was agreeing on the things they found the most simple and then pushing the harder part through the window. So given the memorandum is already causing various issues and where they're living up to the parts of that, it doesn't bode particularly well for the trickiest parts when it comes to what you do on nuclear disposal, when it comes to who monitors the Strait, and when it comes to what the Iranians really want, which is the release of funds and the lifting of sanctions. So I think that there is skepticism in Washington, D.C. And actually, some in Washington, D.C., some Republican lawmakers like the fact that there is skepticism. They don't like the memorandum. They think it's a bad deal for America. And they're almost betting, as I think some Israelis are, on it not working and these negotiations not leading to something, and hoping Trump will then have to go back to more drastic measures.
Well, good luck on them hoping that, because all the signs I see is that Mr. Trump just doesn't want to be dragged back in and would quietly like just to scuttle quietly away. And let me ask you this, because this could play to Mr. Trump's strategy. Is Iran making the headlines these days? Is Iran on the front pages and leading the news bulletins in America?
It still can make the headlines, but it is no longer the kind of rolling news constantly 24/7 when it comes to the TV news channels. And still, I think when Trump announces something, when there is a visit, particularly if it's higher level, like the vice president, then all the tension is on. But you speak to figures and, early on the war, figures working at these US cable channels said, even the the small details of what was happening on the ground. They were putting them all out, and there was a lot of attention, high ratings, user engagement. Now they feel lots of Americans have switched off, and I think that is reflected in some of the coverage too.
Now, there's yet another book out on the Trump administration. This one's called Regime Change Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump. You spoke to the authors, I think, for the Sunday Times at the weekend there. I've been reading it. It's a good read, and you do learn things. Are there some little explosions in it? Are there things in it that's causing waves in Washington?
Yeah, I think with this book, there's no specific smoking gun. I think what it does is it adds a lot of detail, and some of it quite excruciating detail for those involved, into the big themes we already know from the second term. So, for example, on Ukraine, you look at that Zelensky-Trump bust up in the Oval Office, and you see that wasn't a blip. Tensions had been bubbling over for months. Scott Beck had been calling Zelensky, Mr. Bean. There was really a sense that they were moving against before that meeting happened. And then I think what it does is, for example, on the Epstein affair, we knew that Trump, when he said he didn't care about it, that was at least not felt by his team who were worried about it. And the fact that they were having damage limitation discussions in the Situation Room, which is normally the venue for, national security discussions at the highest order, and instead talking about uncorroborated claims, but nipple fetishes and so forth, and what they should do about certain fires. Again, just it adds a lot of color to your understanding. And then I think in DC, certain things about, various aides and their relationships with Trump is adding to a lot of intrigue, palace intrigue, I would say. Trump has already dismissed the book as mostly wrong, but it's worth pointing out there have been leak inquiries, so the whole thing can't be wrong.
If it was, why bother with a leak inquiry? The Democrats, they could be in control of the House, maybe even the Senate come November. Is the Democratic establishment beginning to panic at the number of self-styled Democratic socialists winning primaries and often replacing long-established Democrat incumbents?
Yeah, I think there's a nervousness. I don't think it's full-blown panic yet. When you had the results in New York last week and the Free Mamdani, the New York mayor-backed candidates all won, and you had Kaheem Jeffries, who had endorsed two other candidates in two of those races, he's expected to be the likely speaker if the Democrats take back the House. But yet the candidates he endorses, he clearly doesn't have a hold in the way that Mamdani does. Now, what you'll hear in response to this is, oh, that's New York. We shouldn't think that's the whole of America. But of course, you look to Maine and Graham Plattner. There are signs that this brand of, democratic socialism has energy behind it. The Democrats in DC who are fairly centrist have said to me they're just relieved that Mamdani, under the current rules, cannot run for president.
Was he born in America? I'm not sure he could run.
He was not born in America. So he will be old enough, but he was not born in America.
It's not quite a rule. It's a constitution, isn't it? The founding fathers put that into the constitution to stop a Brit trying to come over and try to take over again through the ballot box. I guess perhaps we should expect, given that the populist right took control of the Republican Party, maybe it's not surprising that there is an uprising of the populist left in the Democrat Party.
Yeah, and also when you speak to MAGA figures, I think that if you think about the Venn diagram or where things cross over, they tend to have more time for the kind of populist wing of the Democrat Party, or at least see it as potentially more threatening or more of a threat to what they're trying to do than they see these establishment Democrats. And for example, I was speaking to some MAGA figures recently, and they were talking about Ro Khanna, who's on that wing of the Democratic Party, and the phrase Epstein class, and how that has been used particularly by that wing of the Democratic Party to talk about kind of Trump and all these financiers in the 90s. And they said, it's genius phrasing. It's the type of thing we should be talking about. So I think it's where perhaps the grassroots and the energy is going to be. Is a challenge for figures like Gavin Newsom, who is seen as more straight-laced, even if they're currently suggesting more of the favorite. And also it's potentially a challenge for the right, which has used some of the same devices that the left are now using.
Indeed it has. Well, I'm sure the populist left and the populist right could agree that it was a mistake for Donald Trump ever to start his war against Iran. Katy, we'll leave it there. Katy Balls, Washington editor for The Times and The Sunday Times.